I'd like to call the Board of Finance Budget Workshop meeting for Thursday, March 10th, 2016 to order. This evening, we have 3 items on the agenda, 2 of which are public forum. The first at the beginning of the meeting. Anyone wishing to address the board in public forum? Hearing none, let's move on to item number 2. Consider and take possible action on proposed fiscal year 2016-2017 budget. Let me just quickly recap, and then we can ask some questions. And the recap is primarily for those in the viewing audience who are watching this with the intent of learning a little bit more. The Board of Finance has been presented with budgets from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education. This is the culmination of a 5-month process. I think it's fair to say 4.5 to 5-month process, and several revisions by the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education. What we have been presented to us this evening, the Board of Education is bringing to us a budget that calls for $58,656,791, and that's their operating budget. The town operating budget is $28,372,576, and debt service is approximately $7.4 million.
4.7.
Or 7.4.
Oh, combined.
Combined. Which overall would, I want to put it in context. The operating budget for the town is a 2.5% increase. The operating budget for the Board of Education is a 1.99% increase. Combined, those 2 operating budgets represent a 2.16% increase. Where we are feeling the most significant pressure on our budget is on the debt service, obviously. We are about $1.9 million up from previous year. No surprise to anybody at this table, and should not be a surprise to those in the viewing audience, as this is directly attributable to the assumption of the responsibility for repayment of the bonds associated with the building of the new Guilford High School. That increase is 35%. That's a significant increase in one line item. Fortunately, that only represents 8% of our overall budget. However, it is a significant increase. There have been a couple of positives that have helped us offset some of the debt service, as well as the increased operating budgets. We had a grand list growth of 0.8%, which netted us some a little over $600,000 in new tax revenue. We are the beneficiaries of an enhanced municipal revenue sharing program that was passed in the state legislature last year. And the net effect well, not the net effect, but we realized an additional $722,000 from the Municipal Revenue Sharing Act passed last year. However, that is offset by some decreases in other line items at the state, so it's roughly about $650,000. The third piece that we're benefiting from is the refunding, and this is the exceptional work done at Town Hall and the First Selectman Office and the Finance Office to refund some of our existing debt, our existing bonds. And I think it's safe to say we're at about $500,000 worth of savings this year, $400,000 to $500,000 in savings as a result of the refunding this year, but also in some subsequent years. And the use of premiums. Between those 2 items, the application of some bond premiums and the refunding, it's about $500,000. So those are the offsets which have actually brought this budget in at a point where we're looking at a mill increase of 0.81 mills, which is a 2.86% tax increase. I think I said this at a previous meeting. If you had told me 3 months ago that we'd be able to bring a budget in under 3%, I would have maybe laughed at you or suggested that there was a windfall coming our way. But clearly there have been some very positive developments over the past couple of months, not the least of which is tremendous effort on the part of the Board of Education, the Board of Selectmen to control costs, and then some creative work around our debt service. And then a modicum of luck with grand list growth and the change at the state level. That's as much of a summary as I think I need. Does anybody have anything else they want to add to that at this point? No? All right, what I'd like to do at this point, and I know we've had the opportunity to work with the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen since December on this. Everything that was presented to us at our February meeting was not a surprise. We had worked with those respective groups, and we understand what was in there, and I think have a good idea. However, that doesn't mean there aren't some additional questions. So I'm going to open it up to anybody who has any questions. And at this point, let's do either board is fine. Board of Education, we don't have to stick to questions on Board of Education or just Board of Selectmen. Anybody have any questions or anything further they want to explore?
Good start.
Mike?
Yeah, I have a couple. I'm not sure if they're really questions as much as commentary, but I'll start with the Board of Ed because it's just a couple of items I had. And again, some of the things that I have noted, I think are more for the public that are watching that are not so familiar with all of this and are, as the chairman said, learning. The first one is actually if the Board of Ed wants to answer. There's two specific questions. One about the discussion about the certified staffing comparison and about the retirements and the major drop-off on retirements. And I know this is a complete crystal ball kind of idea, but when it goes from 8 retirements to 12, 16, 17, and then last year 4, is there any possible way of predicting if that's going to get greater or stay the same? That would be the first question.
You know, unfortunately, when you ask a lawyer if there's any way possible that something might happen, the answer is always going to be yes.
That's why I knew you'd stand up for that one. So.
Yeah, well, it's not likely, the number 4 is not going to go down, obviously. Is it likely to go up? It might, by some. It's not likely to go up to 14 or 12 or 16. We are actually exploring as a board whether there would be some way that we could encourage teachers who are considering retiring to let us know before the budget is being adopted. Some towns actually provide a very modest financial incentive if teachers announce or any staff lets us know that they're going to retire before a particular date. We haven't decided whether to do that or not, but that is something that we're at least thinking about. I think it's fair to say, I think it would be not unlikely that there might be a couple more retirements, but probably not at the level that there have been in some years past.
Okay. I do recall that there was, both at the presentation, I think, on Tuesday and in past meetings, that it was stated that there was a bit of a bubble of retirements coming, and now we've got a much younger staff, which is great, but there's some offset to that, pros and cons.
Well, and I think there are some systemic reasons why the retirements might have been up a couple or 3 years ago. As you may recall, there were some fairly large statewide initiatives that I think some people who were on the fence about, do I stay another year or do I go, might have been inclined to say, okay, it's time, and I don't want to get in, I don't want to face some of these new issues. So we don't see any initiatives like that might have that kind of an effect.
Paul Bill's up here. I have
Yeah, but you have more, Mike?
Yeah, I have one more. This is more of an outlook a little bit for 2017, but it really goes to the investments deferred. And I was looking at some of the items you presented and looking at, now of course there's the difference between deferment and reduction. And there were areas where there was reductions, but there were areas that were deferred. And you stated those as math coaches, high school start time, and music and art increases. And all 3 of those never made it in the budget in the first place, right? I mean, they were considered at some point. So if those were considered, I'm sure they'll be considered again next year. On the site improvement lines, it was deferred. What I noticed was that, and this happened very much at the 11th hour, I believe, in the site improvements, although there was no change, it was stayed flat. There was a small increase, but there was an issue that came up with the lights at the high school that need to be investigated. And so those lights were put into the capital site improvements line item, as it should be, because it's really not an item that's going to go 20 years and be bonded. And it may be an immediate need.
Correct.
But that cut out projects, and I won't go through them, but there were projects at 4 of the schools of about $280,000, which I'm expecting that those will probably have to be reconsidered again next year, assuming that the light issue isn't needing to be taken care of this year. My question coming down to the investments deferred, that amount of investment that was deferred, and then what will be possibly put into the budget next year, is it fair to say that those items deferred are going to be heavily considered next year? And I know the high school start time is probably the biggest single line item that was being discussed, somewhere in the range of, I know it was at low, well, it was as low as nothing, based on one of the options, but as much as maybe $600,000 to $700,000 on the most expensive option. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about what we passed up this year that may be coming up next year, and I think it was great work in the deferment that was done. I mean, I think they were all valuable to do, but they're not going to go away.
Correct, and I appreciate the question. The slide is a bit of a catch-all, so some of those items may have been discussed at public hearings around the budget, but never even made it into the draft budget that the administration presented to the Board of Education. Some other items, like the math coaches, did actually make it into the administrative proposal and came out as the board began working with the budget. The board did make approximately $500,000 worth of adjustments down in the budget that was presented to them from the administrative team. And so items like the math coach fall into that category. And when you mentioned the capital improvements, what we identify as site improvements, to call that a deferment, again, may be more of a catch-all phrase. The initial draft budget included a fairly modest increase in that line. I believe it was about a 5% increase as we work to continue to build that line. And again, that was something that, working with the Board of Education, was removed. Only the increase was removed. We didn't reduce that line. And I appreciate the question about the lights. The lights have gone into that budget as a placeholder, because if there's an immediate need, then those lights would need to be addressed if it represents a safety concern. They're going to need to be addressed immediately. But we do have a list of maintenance priorities. So should we be able to push that forward, either as a bonding item for a future date or find a less expensive way to address the concerns, I wouldn't suggest that we're necessarily looking at unspent dollars that get returned to the town at the end of the year. It means we'd be able to return projects to that list, that priority list for this year, that have currently been pushed off or deferred for a later year.
If I can just note, when Dr. Freeman uses the investments deferred language, that doesn't necessarily mean that a majority of the Board of Education supports each of these items. The board has not voted on any of these items. I think that there's certainly some very strong feeling about the need to do the embedded professional development with the instructional math coaches. We've had tremendous success with those in the literacy area. There is obviously some very strong feeling about high school start times. However, we have a lot more work to do on that issue, including dialoguing with the community and making sure that the community that we're listening to the community and making sure that whatever direction we go in is something that the community really wants. So it maybe some or all of these are going to come back, maybe not, maybe some combination. And in some dollar value, we'll just see.
Right. While the conversations may warrant continued discussion, they may not return to any budget conversation in a form that in which they're represented now, or at a dollar figure. That we're going to continue to work on all of these. And I mentioned yesterday, we will always be looking are there ways to repurpose other resources, are there ways to reassign other resources. So if these come back through the board to you, they may come back in a form that's dramatically different than that in which they were presented this year.
Well, this goes exactly to the enrollment issue that you had stated, that if the enrollment doesn't go down as much as projected, you're going to have to find it somewhere in your budget to keep the teachers on board and be able to serve that. So, and as was mentioned, the Board of Ed has never come back for more. So.
Not lately, anyway.
Ken?
Yeah, I'd like to pursue that a little bit. Building on what Mike was querying on, one of your goals, as a matter of fact, the priorities that the superintendent outlined here for back to 2015-16 was to expand math support at the middle grades. And I don't understand how, well, I don't understand, I just raise a question as to whether our achievement levels in math, which are not as strong as they are in English language arts as a district, why that would not be pursued as an active priority this year, especially since your reliance is on, quotes, new resources and content-focused professional development. I don't know what that actually means in terms of improving proficiency in the classroom and taking a tangible step forward. That's one of my questions. The other question I had is on special ed, which you folks should be commended. You have it under control. You have the costs under control. They're still not dropping off all that much. Do you foresee a further reduction in the numbers of that are devoted to special ed?
Yeah, so I'll take special ed first, and the quick answer is no. We believe that we're beginning to control those costs. We are pleased to see that those costs are beginning to level, but quite honestly, just in the last couple of weeks, we've had changes in special education. It continues to be an incredibly volatile line, and one student developing needs that didn't exist last year, or one student moving into town, could change that dramatically. And so we continue to wrestle with those unpredictables. And I was recently involved in conversations with some folks who are working at a state level to try to look at ways to level out the unpredictable nature of special education, because if you look at it at a state level, the growth line is actually very smooth and predictable. But in any town, in any municipality, it's wildly unpredictable, and you see that when you look at the budgeting line that we've showed you. When we have tried to project a year in advance, we've shown you that we budgeted by dropping off dramatically and then got hit with unexpected costs. There were other years where we budgeted at a high level and had a really low year. It's really difficult. I wouldn't be projecting that there's going to be a significant drop-off. I'd be happy to see a control level and predictable line. To speak to the math coach, I do want to make clear that we continue to invest in the work in mathematics, and the fact that we're not adding additional math coaching this year shouldn't indicate to anybody that we're taking a year off around mathematics instruction. Last year, we purchased a brand new resource in grades K through 5. It was a significant purchase for the Board of Ed. It's a significant commitment on the part of teachers. Last year, there was significant professional development around that resource. It was their first year using it. This is the teacher's second year with that resource, and we're really beginning to see that they are coming up to speed with it. One of our recent resignations from the Board of Education, Mrs. Dudley would point out that anything in education takes 3 years to master. So we're still working with those teachers, developing their mastery with that resource. A significant change in math this year took place at the grade 5 and 6 level, whereby working with the staff members and Mr. Hamill at Baldwin Middle School, we were able to increase the mathematics contact time from approximately 42 minutes a day to nearly 70 minutes a day, a significant investment in time that is allowing us to use that resource to much greater effort. The first math coaching position that we put into this budget 2 years ago, we have just had filled full-time this year, so we do have one math coach on the ground this year. And we continue to work carefully with a mathematics fellow out of the Institute for Learning, which is associated with the University of Pittsburgh. We have contracted time in the district with a math instructional expert who has worked with instructional teams at both the middle and the high school level, and has worked with our leadership team, helping our principals to become more knowledgeable, more skilled leaders of instruction in mathematics. So while we're pushing off bringing in more math coaches, it doesn't for a minute mean that we're not focusing on that math work. I do agree with an observation that Mr. Bloss made. You see the difference in our English language arts performance and math performance, and we've had English language arts coaches in the district in a significant way going on 6 years now. So while I'm perfectly okay with slowing down and focusing on the math in front of us, I do want to continue the conversation and continue talking about bringing those math coaches in, because I do think we can close the gap in math performance and English language arts performance.
Although one of probably the major reason for the gap in the statewide numbers that I gave you last Tuesday is because of 5th and 6th grade. And 5th and 6th grade, we found out that because of the short classes, the 42 minutes, that of the 7 content areas that are tested on the SBAC test, we were only getting to 4 of them. And because there just wasn't enough time. The schedule change now we just actually had Mr. Hamill and some of the Baldwin teachers at a Board of Ed meeting. They are now in 2/3 of the way through the school year. They are about 4/7 of the way through their content areas. So they are on track to actually cover all 7 content areas. I'm with or without math coaches, I'm going to speculate that this is actually going to start to narrow between English language arts and math, largely driven by the change in schedule at Baldwin, which was overdue, but is going very, very well.
I wanted to follow up on a special ed question, and the art is in how questions are asked, and no apologies to my good friend Ken. Controlling or decreasing special education is something that we have never contemplated. We have basically have a flat line. The experiences we had in the earlier 5-6 years ago, we were seeing significant increases. So, you want to talk a little bit about cost avoided as opposed to decreasing costs? So there's really costs avoided are decreased costs.
Correct. And it's hard to count something that never occurred, and but we are very excited about the fact that we have built the capacity to hold more of our students here in the system than we have had in the past. And while we continue, like everybody, to see students with greater challenges coming into our school system, we've now got the ability to meet those students' needs here in the district. We continue to partner with outside groups. We're continuing to partner with local experts and therapists. We've got Learn, our local educational resource center, who's coming in to work with our program at Lakes Elementary School next week. We do believe that by having that capacity locally, we are avoiding the costs of putting students out. Right. One of the exhibits is that special education cost as a percentage of the overall budget has reduced. Again, I do just want to caution the board. If there's a spike in an upcoming year, we're talking about a really small N, and so a couple changes for a couple students could affect that. But we do believe that we're in a much better position to be nimble, to respond to the needs of students, and to be able to maintain more of those students here at home. And not just as a cost avoidance. We honestly think we're providing a better product than those students were receiving 4 or 5 years ago. They're better served being here at home with their classmates than spending an hour on a bus and going somewhere that's not in their home community.
The other one I want to go back to enrollment, so and this is an enrollment and staffing combined question rather. We're seeing a pretty significant projection in enrollment, and I'm afraid, based on recent history, I'm afraid it might not materialize. But you've taken on a significant amount of personnel. If my math is correct, you've got 6.6 teaching positions, and you've got 5 paras, which is offset by 1 additional custodian. So you're looking at a 10.5 or 10.6% decrease in your staffing. That's pretty significant. Is that all attributed to the enrollment drop?
Yes, spread across the different settings. So you're looking at 4 elementary classroom positions that are being reduced, and then at the middle levels, you're talking about ancillary positions, and so those are a result of the reductions over the last few years. So you're looking at the reduction of a reading support position. That doesn't mean that reading support's going away at Baldwin. We previously had 2, and we can now meet the needs of those students with 1. And you're looking at the reduction of a world language position at Adams. Again, we're not eliminating world enrollment language at Adams, but we're able to absorb the students into fewer classes next year because there's been some reduction over the past few years. Paraprofessionals, it's a matter of trying to work more efficiently within the systems that we've put in place, and that's specifically what Learn is visiting us to help us shape as we move forward. Again, last year we had a reduction in staffing as well. The enrollment didn't reduce as much as we had anticipated, so we did add 2 positions back. We didn't come back and ask for more funding to do that. We found within our budget ways to fund those positions. Should there be a miss this year, we might have to create another kindergarten section or 2, and if that is necessary, again, we'll add those positions back. It might not be 6.6 reduced positions, it might only be 5.6, but we would find a way to fund that within the budget. It is, however, you do that a couple of years in a row, and you begin to give up what might have at one time been any sort of wiggle room in there. So we're watching it carefully.
And on the enrollment issue relating to staffing specifically, it's important to remember that we would be down, counting this year's budget, about 20 certified teachers, but for the decision to adopt full-day kindergarten, which added 6 teachers approximately, and the decision to do more in-house special ed, specifically the autism program at Lakes. Now, that added staff, there's no question about it, but it avoided payments to outside service providers. So that wasn't going to, the choice wasn't between adding those staff and not having any expenses. The choice was between adding those staff or paying the same or more likely more funds to some outside provider. So, but we would be down 20 certified staff, but for full-day kindergarten and the increased special ed services.
I have a question. So just, and this is more for my own benefit as well as the viewing public, the embedded professional development, the coaching, that is in place of, or is largely taken the place of sending staff out for professional development?
Hasn't completely eliminated the practice of sending folks out, but it has curtailed that practice. So we do that less often, and we're getting a bigger bang for the investment. What happens with teachers in the coaching cycle is rather than sending somebody to a conference and they come back really excited with a bag full of materials and have to try to implement that here on their own, there's a professional developer who works with each teacher and his or her real students. So you're planning together, you're looking at maybe what your individual needs or individual growth areas are. That coach is in the classroom observing you and giving you real-time feedback, modeling for you, showing you what needs to be done, and working in this constant iterative coaching cycle. Exactly the way that a coach on the field would do. You're watching your athlete, you're modeling for your athlete, and you're giving instant real-time feedback. So we just find it to be a much more effective way to support the staff, particularly looking at that turnover and retirements over the last few years. We've now had, for the first time, coaches on the ground as new staff come in to join us. And so it allows us to train and grow our existing staff, but it also allows us to bring new staff into the way that we do things here in Guilford and teach those instructional practices here on the ground that we really expect for them to have. It's reduced sending people out, but it hasn't eliminated it. And I don't want it ever to completely eliminate it, because sometimes you've got to go somewhere and see something new. And sometimes, so there's always a time and a place for that outside voice, but somebody here who's invested with you has a greater immediate impact than just going out to conferences.
Thank you.
Lou?
I have a couple
Ken?
of
Okay.
comments / questions. It all ties into my bigger picture with when is this yearly increase going to abate? We had heard from one person in the public yesterday, Susan Anderhagen, I think is the name, asking would we ever see a year where there wasn't a tax increase? And I think the answer was no, and we're used to this quality of services that we get here in Guilford. If you look at a lot of the numbers that Mr. Bloss showed in his slides were 2014 data primarily, which is the last municipal report that was out. And if you look at the median per capita income in Guilford from 2010 to 14, it actually went down. If you look at the median household income, in Guilford from 2010 to 2014. It actually went down. And yet our budget went up by 13% overall, and our education budget went up by 12%. And the point I've been trying to make, and I think Mrs. Anderhagen was asking, is there a way at some point in the future, do we have a limit? We're up to $95 million now in the budget. I don't believe that we can count on economic development to pay our way there, because the town just isn't big enough to add a new rock pile every year or to add a new 66 High Street every year. And while that does mitigate the increase, it doesn't end it. And when you have the year where that drops off, then your price jump is going to be even greater. This year's mill rate would be 29.28 were it not for the contribution of the rock pile instead of the 29.05 that we're going to get. When I look at the teachers, Matt asked about your decline in teachers. I see us down to 9.8 students per certified teacher. I think 337 is the number this year. And that has gone down, I see, every year from 10.8. The same thing with busing. When we look at the busing, our cost per student in busing has gone up dramatically. I think the number's $529 per student, just on the regular, not the special ed busing. I'm talking regular students. And that doesn't factor in the fact that not everyone takes the bus. A lot of kids drive if they're in the high school, and a lot of people get dropped off at school. So the actual per student cost is significantly higher. Where am I going with all this? What I see is, as I mentioned the other day, our cost per student in this year's budget is $17,700, which is up dramatically really every year. And I want to know where or if there is a desire, or where can we look to see the point wherein we are not going to be growing our budgets at 3+%, or 2.5%, 3.5% a year. When do we get to a point where we can be at zero?
Depends on what the people of the town of Guilford want.
Well, here, I agree with that, but
The good news is that we have a referendum form of government here. And people have voted for these budgets. Why? Because they like the product, the services that they're getting. And they're satisfied, they're comfortable with it. That's one reason we're very focused on trying to do a cost-benefit analysis. It's very easy to talk about cutting costs. It's less easy to talk about what the impact is going to be on the services. There is one way, and one way only, maybe a way and a half, but there's one way to, if you came to us and said, we don't want you to have any increase at all this year, we're going to cut $1.5 million out of your budget. There's one way to do that: increase class sizes dramatically. 85% of our budget is salaries and health benefits.
So,
let me finish. You asked the question.
Yeah, no, I apologize.
It's very important to recall that we are subject to a binding arbitration provision. Anybody who thinks that a binding arbitration is going to result in a 0% salary increase and a reduction in health benefits is just not being realistic. Our teachers have actually been very good in terms of what their collectively bargained increases have been. They have been not much more than the rate of inflation. But the fact is that arbitrators are often arbitrators are going to fundamentally wind up awarding salary increases that are roughly the cost of living increase. The only way for us to reduce that line, or hold that line at zero, is by reducing staff. The only way to reduce staff in a statistically meaningful amount would be to increase class sizes, and that is something that we've been very resistant to do, because you see all those numbers that we put up in terms of where we are in the state. Those aren't just coincidences, and there is an impact on the performance of the school district and instruction if things like class sizes, instructional coaches, supports for special ed, outplacements, if those are changed, there is going to be an impact. So far, the people in town have said, we like this product. We like the services that we're getting. We like the quality of education here. We like the fact that we've got the 4th ranked high school in the state of Connecticut. We like the fact that we're at the top of our reference group. We like the fact that our kindergarten class sizes are small and there's full day kindergarten. We believe all those things are important. And that's, I think, the short answer is I think that our budgets are going to be different when people are dissatisfied with the services that they're getting and comparing to the dollars.
I don't disagree with what you just said. I would posit that I don't think the turnout that we see at referendum is an overwhelming vote in favor of the way of how much money we spend or where we spend it. The number of voters that typically turn out and vote, yes, the budget gets passed, this one's going to get passed. But I don't know that whether I'd say that is representative of the bulk of the population here in Guilford. And if you look at if you look at the income statistics and you look at the number of people that are moving out of Guilford and out of state, it's not just a Guilford problem, the Connecticut has it in a huge way. People are leaving and they're going south. And for those of us that can afford to stay here, that's fine. But we're supposed to also represent that group of people that's voting with their feet and that group of people whose incomes aren't going up. So the short answer is that we don't have, it sounds like there's not a plan in place or there's not a level wherein we can stop this, whether it's 100 million or whether it's after a certain point we won't spend more, we won't go up by more than 1% a year type thing.
Well, let me just make a couple of observations about that. One is that if we lessen our educational services and make Guilford a less attractive place to move to from the point of view of a quality education, that's going to encourage people to leave.
Agreed.
It's going to affect property values. And so it's very hard, and this is an extraordinarily complicated analysis. If we said, okay, we're going to be comfortable, satisfied, having an okay educational system here, that makes it less attractive for people moving, who are choosing to move. Do they move to Madison, to Guilford, to Branford, to East Haven? If we say, you know what, we're okay with being okay, that will have an effect on property values. How much? I can't do that analysis. I can't do that kind of an evaluation, but it will. Right now, Guilford is I think, again, we hate to govern by anecdote on the Board of Ed, and just because somebody tells me something at Big Y doesn't mean it's or Bishops, I guess I should say, it's the truth. But I think there's a feeling right now that this is a great town to be in. It's a great town to move to. People, I think it's interesting, the lady who moved here from Danbury. Danbury has higher property taxes than we have. We have a lot of people moving up from Fairfield County. If you look in the Times, just for kicks, I look at the real estate section and see what that $500,000 house in Westport, what their taxes are. They're double ours. So we are a real good alternative to people who are looking for a quality education system and are willing to pay a little bit more on their house price in order to get it. Now, and that's benefiting the people that in fact are selling and moving to Florida or retiring. They're getting some of that money back that they've been paying in taxes.
Agreed. There's, people sell their house in Fairfield and move here and pay 30 cents on the dollar relative to that house, and we look good. I don't disagree with that.
Let me make one other point, though, about declining enrollments and why it's a little complicated, frankly, to say, well, per student costs are going up when enrollment is going down. How come that's the case? Well, there's actually a very simple reason from a point of view of economics, and I just jotted down some numbers while we were waiting. Let's just take a hypothetical school district that's got a $50 million budget, say, hypothetically, and there are 3,500 students in that district, hypothetically. Well, that would be a $14,285 per student cost. Now, let's say that hypothetical school district had a $50 million budget, but had 100 fewer students, right? That would drive their per student cost up by almost 3%. Right? It'd be up $14,705. So around a 2.5% decrease in enrollment leads to almost a 3% increase in per student costs. Well, how is that even possible? Well, the reason is because you have to add a couple of other variables. If that 3,500 student school district, they were all in one grade in one building, you might be able to reduce your costs by something approaching 3%. Probably not, but something approaching 3%. But let's add a couple of more variables. Let's just say hypothetically that 100 student decrease is across 13 grades. And let's just say hypothetically that that 100-student decrease is across, I don't know, let's pick 7 buildings, let's just, for a hypothetical purpose. So that 30 at a high school, that's 7.5 per grade, 15 in a middle school, that's 7.5 per grade, 15 in fifth and sixth, that's 7.5 per grade, and 40 in all 4 of the K-4 schools. So you're really talking about a decrease of 1 kid in a class. Why does that not lead to staffing changes? Because they're not all in one place.
Right,
and it has no effect on administrators or heat or lights or special ed or custodians or electricity or any of the rest of those things. You know how an enrollment decrease might lead to a significant budget savings? If you close a building.
That's where I was going to go.
If one, and Madison has done this because of enrollment declines. Madison has had much more substantial enrollment declines than we've had in Guilford. Are we going to someday go to 3 elementary schools? Maybe, but not today. We, as you were at the meeting when we met with the elementary school principals, and we've got, what, 6 empty classrooms out of 4 buildings, 6 or spread across 4 buildings. We're not close to being able to close an elementary school. If that happens, that will lead to some substantial savings. Why? Because we've got 1 less building, fewer support staff. But we're a long way from there.
No, I hear you on the distribution of fixed versus variable cost. And we talked about, I know as I brought up closing a building. There was a time, probably 12 years ago, what was our peak? We had significantly, I know our classrooms are full, but years ago, we had over 4,000 students in the same space that we have now.
Well, not exactly, but...
Actually, it was a smaller space because we hadn't put the additions on Adams.
We hadn't put the additions on Adams, and
so
we obviously have got a new high school now, and that the old high school is pretty stressed at those levels. I'm not sure that it was 4,000.
I think 4,200 rings a bell.
I'll look it up, but I don't think so.
And then the other thing, getting back to the size of the classes, I know we have an excellent product, and I've always believed that we've had an excellent product. There was also a time where we had more students per teacher than we have now. And if we were to roll back, and it wasn't that long ago, if we were to roll back to that, I don't know, and you know better than I, how much larger those classes were then than they are now, and or what the savings would be in that environment, how many staff reductions we would have if we were to go back 5 or 6 years when we had significantly more students per teacher.
Well, and again, we could do that.
But did we have an excellent product then, though? We did, right?
No. We've got a significantly better product today. I happen to remember this because I did a presentation to the old PTA, as you remember, the year I became the chair of the board. Our statewide ranking on CAPT in 5th grade when I came on the board was 40th in the state in math, 40th. That was unacceptable. That was completely unacceptable. We have moved from the demographically, just purely from a socioeconomic point of view, we're close to the bottom of the B reference group. We're in the bottom third. Our performance is at the top of the top third. That is not a coincidence. I'm not going to say that the only variable in that is class size, but it is very hard to deny that class sizes are not a variable and do not have an impact on instruction, especially when we're struggling with something that is extraordinarily hard to do, and that is to follow differentiated instruction when we are trying to keep kids in the same class and meet all the needs of the high achievers as well as the needs of the kids who need extra help. That is a very hard thing to do. And we did go through, we made a very deliberate decision a few years ago and with a great amount of parental demand, frankly, to reduce class sizes, particularly at the elementary school levels. We're asking a lot now with Common Core, with the new instructional materials, with the new curricula that we're implementing. It's a hard job. I've actually substituted a few times up at the high school just to kind of get a grip on and get a feeling for just what it is, what we're asking our teachers to do. it is hard. And in a bigger class, it is that much harder. One of the things we had to do when we had the bigger classes, especially depending on the circumstances, we had to put a para into a lot of classes. We've actually done away with that. We've been able to reduce the paras, particularly in classes at the elementary level. So I think I understand your concern. I think we all share the concern. But right now we're pretty comfortable with where we are on the benefit cost equation. We could absolutely come in here with a zero budget increase, but there would be an impact on the quality of the product. There would be. What's acceptable and what's not acceptable to parents and to taxpayers, that's up to them. I think right now, though, people are pretty comfortable, pretty pleased with what the schools are doing, and they think it's a decent value. I just want to remind everybody also that this is maybe the one area where we are getting an indirect. We're very quick to criticize the federal government for not supporting our product more. Well, there is an indirect subsidy through deduction of local taxes. So whatever your marginal tax rate is, in fact, the federal government is paying that percentage of your local property tax. So it's nobody's going to defend the tax system we have. I don't think anybody in the room is going to do that. The best we can do is try to deliver the best product that we can at a reasonable cost. And we are in the flat middle of the state in terms of our average per student costs. Flat middle of the state. And we still have that performance that we have. That's what we're trying to do.
I'd like to jump in here, if I can. Ken, and I had a question before, but I'm going to hold that question for thought and just try and respond to some of the premises that you raise and some of the points that you raise. And the first one, which I think is a tricky argument to make, is that the referendum is not necessarily representative of the will of the town. I hope I get my citation right here. It was Winston Churchill basically said something to the effect of democracy may be crazy, but it's certainly the best political system out of all the crazy political systems. So it's a dangerous. Let me do the same thing Bill did. You had the floor for a bit. So if we start attacking the process, you lose the opportunity. You feel very strongly, in fact, absolutely convinced that you see this perfectly clearly. There are plenty of other people who we've seen who are absolutely convinced of the opposite proposition, that we're not spending enough money, that we should be doing even more, and that there's a lot of pressure on the school board and the town to make services. And we have this process, not to lecture you, because I know you know this, but we have a process to sort of balance those conflicting objectives. And my sense of this budget process as we go through two books and sub-binders and printouts and emails is government is small ball. And the present town hall administration and all the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed and the administration of the school district, are faced with dozens, hundreds of tiny decisions every day, every week that have an impact eventually on the budget. And if there was a $500,000 chunk laying out there to knock off of this $1.7 million operating budget increases, yeah, it'd be great. We could get this thing from, a 2% to, closer to 1%. That would make everybody happy. I think those dozens and hundreds and thousands probably of small decisions have been made, and there's been a declining rate of increase. Okay, I know that's a complicated thing, but the amount of the operating budgets have been shrinking over the last 4 years, and significantly as you accumulate it. And so I'm more impressed with the process. If I saw the process breaking down, and I had a real concern that the administration of the town and the administration of the school district, I would be doing something similar to what you're doing. I hope I see it that clearly. But I'm also moved by two other things, which is I really think the motivation of the administrations is, in a sense, implicated by this argument. You're not the only person to make this argument, that we got to operate from the premise that a zero tax increase is the goal. And anything that doesn't achieve that goal is somehow flawed. Well, I mean, that assumes that there's some sort of motivation that's improper. And I think we can probably agree that, we're not trying to drive people out of the town. Everybody's objective is the same, to make the best town we could possibly have, and people work super hard to do that. So I think motivation-wise, we're in the right spot. Are they lazy? I don't think so. I mean, this is a hard-working operation. People are grinding every day to get these things exactly right. Is everything exactly right every single time? Of course not. That's why there's multiple boards, there's checks and balances, there's an opportunity to try and spot problems. You have new people come on who have a sharp eye and an ability to analyze things. I think this is a tremendous system. I love the concept of a Board of Finance. You come from Pennsylvania, you see none of this stuff, right? New England is fantastic, and this is one of the things that makes it fantastic. So that potentially leaves what I seriously would consider really crumbs. I mean, there's not big chunky differences in any given year that are going to be able to add up to $1.7 million of operating budget increase. And I'm sort of intentionally leaving the school, the debt service increase off the table, because that was pretty close to overwhelming consensus that was a necessary thing, and we all made a decision to do something that was important and valuable to the town, and I'm leaving that out of the discussion. For today's purposes, talking about these operating budgets. So, absolutely, if you or anyone else, and we implore folks to come to these meetings and point out what we're missing, because I would be the last person to suggest I've spotted every single nook and cranny in these things that could be spotted. But we do our best to do that, and if somebody has a particular item and it's compelling and it makes sense, and we're able to say, you know what the heck are you guys doing? That one is, there's $50,000 you're laying on the table, why don't we knock it back? First of all, we would probably have had that discussion 2 months ago, the way the system probably is currently set up. And 9 times out of 10, they would probably have had a chance to respond to it already, and I would suggest they probably would. So, not to sound like the civics class, but I mean, I think this
Well,
is,
I think it's very healthy, though, to have all kinds of discussions. There's no right or wrong answer. I mean, basically, we're here to discuss the issue, and I think we should listen.
I'm not shutting it down. I don't think you heard me say shut it
The
down.
only- the only-
I'm encouraging, absolutely, every single criticism you got, other than the proposition that the only acceptable budget increase is a zero budget increase. I will not accept that proposition.
First of all.
If that works, I'll take it.
First
If
of
it
all.
doesn't, I won't.
First of all, you said 3 things that I didn't say. I didn't say that the only acceptable proposition was 0, 1. 2, I
You
did
also
not.
said that nobody was willing to move
Wait,
toward
wait,
zero,
wait,
which was
wait.
inaccurate.
Two, I did not critique the process at all. I think everybody has worked quite diligently. I have not critiqued the process whatsoever. 3, I have never called anybody that we've dealt with, nor have I insinuated that anybody that we dealt with is quote-unquote lazy. I think people have worked very, very hard and put in a lot of hours, and I respect everybody's role here, and I am just asking the questions that I think should be asked. I do think there is a way to lower the budget. Now is not the time to go into it, and I think it can be done without crushing services.
Well,
And
you
there
didn't
are
hear
other
me say,
people. There are
you
other
never
people.
said that either, by the way, so let's not.
There are
let's not
other
get sort of
people.
tripped up.
There are other people that have voted and will vote the same way. And with regard to the referendum, what I said and what I maintain is that a voter turnout of 18 to 20% is not an overwhelming vote of being in favor. Now, and that's not criticizing the process. It's just the way it is statistically. And that's all I said. It was not a critique of the process. So thank you for your comments.
I'd like to weigh in a little bit here, and again, I think these kind of discussions are healthy. For a variety of reasons.
I quite enjoy them,
For a
actually.
variety of reasons. And some of it is, it's always good to hear other people's opinions, because we sometimes get shrouded by our own vision. And I'm clearly one of those individuals that falls prey to that upon occasion. But I have a historical vision that suggests that municipal government and education are different than any other type of finance and budgeting. It's an unusual beast. I think the chairman talked about the there's a reasonable expectation that costs might rise commensurate with cost of living, all right? Well, you pick the cost of living, what's in the basket of goods for the cost of living? I don't think the basket of goods in the cost of living increases is as heavily weighted to employee benefits, salaries, medical benefits, pension. So right off the bat, we're at a different place relative to the cost of living increases. Secondly, let's say we get to nirvana, which is where we take all the excess, every bit of excess cost out of a budget. What do you do with the contractually obligated 2% salary increases, 5% medical cost increases, contributions to 401k? So I have always found it somewhat specious to suggest that we can ever maintain zero increased budgeting. Now, you mentioned you can do it, but eventually you're going to have to cut everything. Not everything, but you're going to have, and we had that discussion already about the quality and the services. Yes, we can stop funding the fire department. We could do that. Well, we might not be able to, but there may be some.
I didn't say that, Charlie.
I know. Charlie understands. So it concerns me that is achievable when you say we can't rely on grand list growth, and we continue to get a declining share of intergovernmental transfers from the state, let alone there's no money coming to us from the feds anymore. All right. So for us to continue to say we can absorb, let's say, 2 or 2.5% operating increases, all right, without raising taxes, because I think you've admitted we're not going to get the DDRs. We don't, and you're absolutely right. We don't have enough open space to do development to build it up. So that is what concerns me, is that sometimes. And maybe I'm just not smart enough to figure it out, but I can't see to the point where we could say we're never going to spend more than $100 million on the budget. Maybe that's a personal choice, because then you're forcing me to say, what am I willing to do without? And I think Bill has clearly said, over the years, this community has supported the product, and the product is not just Board of Education, and I feel you've been slighted here, Joe, in terms of the fire department, what we've done at the fire department over the last 10 to 15 years, we've absorbed a significant amount of increased expenditure, but we've gotten significant benefit out of a full-time paid fire department. We have a police department that is exceptionally rated, all kinds of accreditations throughout the country. We have a public works organization that does tremendous amount of work. You want to talk about cost avoidance, we utilize that public works crew to build roads in this community. And people can make some arguments, do we need them to do that? Well, I think there's been some cost-benefit analysis relative to what would it cost us to have contractors do that work. So I just think that, we may all agree to disagree, I think this community has shown a propensity and a willingness to support quality if they believe that quality is being managed appropriately. I think, I've got numbers here somewhere, but I think we have passed the referendum 11 out of the last 12 on the first referendum, somewhere around that number. That wasn't always the case. My first year as chair in 1993 or 94, it was 3 referendums, all right? What did we have at that time? We had exactly what you're asking. We had a more active electorate at the time, but it was largely the result of Guilford's Tea Party, the first Tea Party in this community, the Guilford Taxpayers Association, right? And then there have been other instances. There have been 3 other occasions where the budget has gone down since that time, and that was usually around some pretty significant event that spiked the increase. And people have a right to come out and say that, but we have never had significant turnout, never above 30%, until we went to a second or a third referendum. And again, we've made jokes about this. Chairman Bloss and I make jokes about this all the time. We'd like to believe people trust us. They trust this process. They trust the Board of Selectmen, I trust the Board of Education. I think, and there are other people who say it's just complacency, as people don't feel it's important, or they don't feel that they can change anything by voting. Well, I happen to disagree with that. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Again, I'm sensitive to the fact, and I agree with you 100%. We have the responsibility to develop budgets and govern for the vast majority. We couldn't put a budget out every year that the top 5% or the top 10% could afford, because that's what they really want, with 5% increases. Nor I think it's responsible to put a budget out that only addresses those that can't, at the bottom end of the economic scale, who can't afford any increases whatsoever. So we continue to have to govern for the middle. And I'm sorry to pontificate, but the point I want to make is a significant amount of the expenditures that significant, Board of Education, what is it, 70, 75% are employee-related, 80% employee-related?
85.
And the town side, similar, 65, 70%? Employees, yeah.
And salaries.
Salaries
And salaries and benefits, yeah. So, again, but I think these discussions are actually healthy, and I agree that we should do it. More questions of anybody? I did have a couple for Joe. I feel like you've been, as I said, you've been slighted here. Be careful. He just declared today.
Don't go that way.
He just declared. Yeah, he just declared. Right. Joe, I wanted to talk about employees. I think at your presentation the other night, you said that there were no new employees in this budget.
That's correct. I just want to make one comment about voter turnout, if I may, before I answer that question. To Ken's point, the fact that only 18 or as much as...
Last year, 16.
16 turned out. If there was a displeasure with the budget, I think you would have a lot more turning out. That might be another way to look at it. Okay? Your question, Madam, sorry.
My question was about employees.
Okay.
There are no increases in here?
No increases this
At the
year.
department level, were there requests for increases?
There could have been,
Okay.
but when we sent out the budget packages, my request to the department heads were, please, no increases, because they might not last.
What,
They might not survive in the
increases or the department head? Okay. Joe, it also bears, and this is really germane to the discussion we just had and some of the comments of the Board of Education, over the past 5 years, 6 years, your tenure here, what has happened with staffing levels and employee numbers?
Over the past 6, 7 budgets, I guess now, we have decreased equivalent of 13 positions.
13 positions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me, I stand corrected. And the last budget, we added 2 of those back, so
Okay, so it's 11.
a net of 11.
One other question was related to medical benefits. You want to explain why we were able to see a negative, nearly 7% contribution in the pension line item?
Happy to, okay. We have been continuing to fund the pension at the suggestion of the actuaries, or the ARC contribution that the actuaries tell us to contribute.
Okay.
And the pension population, I guess you might say, is decreasing because every new employee now is not entitled to be part of the pension, but is entitled to be part of the defined contribution plan, which is the 401A. So the pension population is shrinking.
Correct.
That's number one. Number two, like I said, because of all the years that we now have been contributing, the full amount of our contribution that was recommended by the actuary. We've now caught up in the years that we haven't been contributing. And also, we have written off, so to speak, the bad performing years. I think the last year was 2008 was the worst year. That's all gone from our evaluation. Okay? So that's the reasons why our pension contributions have been decreasing.
Joe, the question always comes to mind, why aren't we continuing to fund at a certain level? Are we concerned at all about the funding percentage levels of our plans? Where are we relative to the plans?
Where are we to the plans? We're almost at 90% for both the town and the pension, and the police plan,
That's it for
which
me.
is pretty remarkable when you consider where other pension plans are.
Correct.
So,
That-
for instance, if everybody was to retire tomorrow, we would be only 10% short.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's not going to happen.
Lou?
Joe, there was one particular spike in Park and Rec's budget
Yeah.
for utilities, almost $40,000.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what that was for?
Yeah, that main factor in that line was for the new fitness center,
Okay, the
Which
former
was-
science wing.
former science wing, yeah, that's correct.
And so why, I guess, why, did we have to keep that building?
For the time being, it's our building,
The town's
the
building?
town's building, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess my question is, I'm not getting into the mechanics of why it's there. I mean, the building has life, it's got some value.
A lot of value, a lot of useful life left in it,
Okay.
okay?
And
And a matter of fact, that the size of the building pretty much is the size of this building, believe it or not.
Okay, so that'll be another asset.
It's about
for the town.
26,000 square feet,
So it's
actually.
another asset. for the town.
Absolutely, yeah.
Are we anticipating some revenue production out of that facility?
We would be anticipating program fees, yes. Okay. Now, how much, I can't tell you because we don't know the success of the programs at this time.
Through Park and Rec?
Park and Rec,
Or-
Park and Rec
not
will-
general fund,
will run.
Park and Rec.
I'm just wondering what department would be recognizing those
Yeah.
possible revenues.
Right, that would go into their program account. Right.
Okay, thanks.
Mike?
Welcome.
I have two, if I could go back to staffing real quick.
Sure.
Just going through the list, there appear to be 9 open positions, and I guess they're budgeted,
Yes.
so there's not going to be an ad if there's going to be more staff, which there will not be, as we know. But are those positions going to be, are they intended to be filled? If possible?
Yep.
Because if they're not filled for any reason, then there's a additional savings that comes out. I mean, not to say that it's, I don't want to ever say that it's padded or anything like that, but they're open positions that are just not filled now, but they're intended to be filled.
At the
and there's
time
9 of
the
them.
budget was put together, those positions were vacant.
Okay.
We keep Mitch pretty busy in interviewing right now. Most of those are already filled. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, most of those are already filled?
Yeah, if you want to pick out certain positions, we can tell you if they're filled or
Nope,
not right now.
nope, no need. I just wanted to know whether or not that was.
Back to me. And most have been filled with lower paying positions. The people that are leaving usually at higher positions.
Yeah, I saw a grouping in one department that there were like 5 in one department, and it could have been turnover, it could have been retirement. I don't know exactly what it was, but I just wanted
And
to check.
sometimes one person leaving in certain departments will have a domino effect of people picking up, and there'll be openings as we go along.
The other, it really isn't much of a question, I just, maybe you want to comment on it further, but there was a question the other night by a member of the public that asked about the IT budget going up. And I thought it was interesting, I did look at that, because going through the workshops and talking through all those, the major increase in that, it was a $40,000 increase, and it was then cut by the Board of Selectmen to 20. And actually, it might have been 26, because 24 of it is education and training on the Munis system.
Right.
Which is, I believe, Sheila can answer this, or maybe you can answer, but it's really been upgraded, and it's all about the software training and making sure we can do a better job. So it's not hardware, it's not software, it's the education of the program itself, which is key to running the town,
There's no sense in buying that equipment.
if you don't know how to use it. And that's what came out of the workshop. So that was literally all of the increase in the IT, was education.
Munis has gone through, and Sheila can comment further on this if she'd like. Munis has gone through an extensive upgrade in their software, and our staff has to go through, again, extensive training to learn how to use the upgrades. Is there anything you want to add to that?
One thing I can add is we've been using Munis for probably 15 years, if not more. 20, I've used Munis in New Haven as well. We've been doing things the same way for that long. So part of what the amount in the budget covers is what Munis calls an investment assessment, where they will come and watch how you do things daily and tell you why you're doing it that way. You could be doing it much better another way. And they're going to make us more efficient. And I think that's important.
And I think I will add, this is for not just the finance department, but it's for a multi-department assessment.
I believe it's split between the Board of Ed too, isn't it? There's a certain cost split in the Board of Ed?
Not on the education side,
Not-
but on the,
okay. But in the software, and,
Right.
okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
So just to clarify then, so we've had a net reduction of 11 positions with no reduction in service.
Correct.
Yeah, so the efficiency,
My point,
right.
so I
Your
didn't
point's
say we
made.
had to cut heads, I'm just saying.
And that's why I asked that
Things
question.
can be-
That's exactly why I asked that question, because at some point,
Everybody says
there's zero
cuts
returns.
means-
There are zero returns by cutting.
But the reductions were through attrition, I might add.
And you're assuming the same amount of work is being done, correct? Right. So what's important to understand is some of that work has been going on for several years. This is not a snapshot, you know, it's.
No,
yeah,
he
and
said it was
that's why-
7 or 8 years, he didn't.
That's why I asked the question.
But again, I will add that there were 13 back in the 2010 or 11 budget, I can't remember at that point. But over the years, we did have to then add some back, which we did in 2016 budget.
And you aren't
So
now.
We get to a point where we just become stretched too thin to perform the services. And one position added was Park and Rec.
Right. But then it gets into the issue of whether you're rolling off the top and putting, where in the cycle you're adding and taking off.
And the other one was Public Works.
Other questions?
Can I just follow up on one thing Mr. Mazza said? Sure. Science wing, just to fully answer.
Oh, yeah,
that
yes,
question.
please, clarifications
I just
are-
want to remind everybody that had the town not agreed to do what Mr. Mazza and the Board of Selectmen did, and that is to take control of the formerly known as Science Wing, there would have been a substantial state penalty because there were still, at the time, were still outstanding bonds. Now, we got permission from the General Assembly through Representative Widlitz to go in this direction, but this was an extraordinarily rational economic decision on the part of the town to take control of the Science Wing, because it's a perfectly good building. Or space anyway, and once it's made independent, it's got a lot of useful life left, and we don't have to pay several $100,000 back to the state of Connecticut. So whenever you're thinking about the cost, when you're,
$600,000.
yeah, so whenever you're thinking about the marginal cost in any one budget year of keeping that building going, think about how many 600,000, how many of those payments or expenses could go into 600,000. Sure. So, if you just allow me to mention one other thing, this budget, I think we're all on the town government side sensitive to the property tax burden, particularly on those that are most vulnerable. And one of the things that it's not our side of the budget, but it's the town side of the budget that I think we, as elected officials, ought to be most proud of is the most meaningful progressive senior property tax relief program in the entire state of Connecticut, maybe one of the most meaningful ones in the entire United States. This is a great senior tax system. We protect the most vulnerable taxpayers to the extent that Connecticut state law will allow us to do it. We have done everything that we can do to make sure that those people are able to stay here as long as they want to. And that they are not faced with tax increases if they make less than, at the time it was adopted, the general per household income. So I think that one of the things we need to recognize on this board, and you've supported us on that, you have continued to make sure that that program is fully protected, and I think, what are there, 800 people in the program now?
A little over 800.
And that has done more to protect people who are at most at risk than any other single thing that we could do in terms of saving a couple of dollars here or not spending a couple of dollars there. That is a very meaningful program.
And it's pretty much stayed at that 800 household level for the last
It's plateaued.
3 or 4 years.
Yeah, it's pretty much plateaued.
Yeah.
We always knew there was going to be a ramp-up period, but then the mortality tables start to come into play, and, some will age off and some will come on. And we've been at, the real dollar value has been around $1 million for those same number of years, too.
And
so it's actually becoming a smaller percentage
of the budget. Right.
Right. And I think there's only 1 year in the entire
The revalue.
10, 15, 12 years it's been in existence that we hit the cap.
Right.
Only 1 year.
And it was because of the reval.
Yeah. And
That's because property that tended to be occupied by seniors didn't have the same fall in property values during the recession as the new developments in other parts of town. But it's a great program.
it's the envy of all the towns around us.
I saw Senator Fasano was thinking about trying to do something in North Haven that's similar to this, and I think they would all be wise to consider this. I know Durham just adopted something like our program.
I'm asked about it all the time when I'm with my colleagues. So thank you for bringing that up. Anything else?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we come to that point in the evening. Does anybody want to take a motion or make a statement about where they think, what we should do with this budget? Or do you want to leave that to me to start the discussion? Well, I'll take the first straw. I'd make a motion that we move these budgets forward as is, without cutting them, which would result in a total expenditure of $94,485,580. And I'm not going to commit to the mill rate increase because we actually will set the mill rate after the referendum. However, it is anticipated to be a 0.81 increase or a 2.86% tax increase. And that's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Is there any discussion? Comments?
Usually we all make
Don't,
comments,
yeah,
right?
everybody want to jump in once? Don't fight
I'll make
them.
a comment.
Peter.
Except that everyone
Peter.
wants to go home. right?
Yeah, Peter's up.
Mine will be very short. I mean, basically, when you measure performance, there's always a benchmark that you utilize to measure the performance. And when you're considering labor contracts or any kind of price increase, the benchmark has always been inflation. What is the inflation rate? And the inflation rate for 2015 was 0.7%. But the thing that you have to consider is the fact that the government, the way they compute rate of inflation, there's only two variables. One is wage increases, the other is cost of housing. It does not include college tuition increases, cost of health care, cost of groceries, coffee, consumer goods, and so forth. There's virtually no wage-induced inflation today. We all know that. U6 unemployment number is closer to 10%. The government, what they tell us, what is 4.9%, doesn't take into consideration the people that have dropped out of the workforce, the people that are working part-time, and the people that are underemployed. Housing has not ever recovered from the highs of several years ago. So officially, the government inflation rate of 0.7% is really quite misleading. When I look at the Board of Ed, I mean, salaries and medical insurance account for the largest increase. However, I'm very impressed, based in terms of what the Board of Ed and Dr. Freeman have been able to do, and request the lowest budget increase in the last 5 years at 1.99%. That's outstanding. I mean, considering the fact that we came from 3.14% 5 years ago down to 2.98, 2.97, 2.49, 1.99 is a home run. And we have a good product. And what we spend in Guilford, we're right in the middle. We produce a good product, but we're not big spenders. We are in the middle. So I want to thank Dr. Freeman and the Board of Ed for doing a phenomenal job in keeping the keeping the budget at a five-year low of 1.99. As far as the town is concerned, Guilford earned a AAA rating by S&P. And we earned it because we have good management. We have a good first selectman, we have good selectmen, and we have good department heads. What that means, basically, it means that our interest on debt service is very low. And what that means ultimately is the fact that the taxpayer doesn't have to pay as much money to borrow or to pay for the debt service itself. The interest rate will be considerably lower. The operating and capital part of the budget is up 2.5%. That's in line, and it was initially budgeted, first selectmen, as well as the department heads were able to trim about $422,000 off the initial request, plus the fact that the interest rates came in quite low, or lower than we anticipated. So there was savings there. The debt service, a 35.24% increase, is no surprise. We're building a first-class high school, state-of-the-art. What does that mean to the taxpayers? Your property value is solid. We're going to continue to have quality results with the students that go through our system. And the overall budget of a 7.94% increase sounds frightening, but I mean, obviously, we're paying for a first-quality school system. The other thing that's really impressive, and I know Mr. Mazza has emphasized this, but I want to just bring it up again, is the fact that our rainy day fund, okay, that basically shows how financially sound we are. It was 3,131,917 in 5 years ago. Now it's at 6,763,025. So all the department heads, the town selectmen, the leadership, and of course, the leadership of Mr. Joe Mazza have to be congratulated for the hard work and providing the Guilford residents with a first quality service, first quality educational system. And I'm happy to be part of the communion, and I wholeheartedly approve and vote yes for this budget.
Ken?
Yeah, I want to speak for the budget, of course, and hopefully it'll be unanimity. And I'm just going back to the time in December when we started the cooperative and collaborative process where we became involved and engaged in both budgets. The workshops in January, the meetings that we had with the Board of Ed in December. So these budgets, as you said, Matt, to start the meeting, don't come as a mystery to us. It's not. We were engaged in the process, and we watched both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education exhibit considerable restraint in the formulation of these budgets. And the fact that voter turnout is at 18%, we can't control voter turnout. I wish we could in the United States. We have low percentages voting, and we can interpret that any which way, but if 5 people come out to vote and they're the only ones engaged, then they own the democracy. It's open to all of us. I think the one area where I'd like to commend both of the boards on is that you don't factor a budget based on the long ago. What was satisfactory 5 and 10 and 20 years ago. You look at the demands, the needs of the town today and in the second decade of this century are far greater. We expect more from government. When you raise the specter of averaging students per teacher, it is not a fair readout of what education today is all about. It's about meeting the needs of all students. And you may have a program that involves 5 students. You may have a program that a regular class size that has 15. I don't think you can average the number of students per teacher and come up with a meaningful understanding of what your educational system is, particularly when you look at special ed and see all of the things that we are doing in this area. And I'm impressed by the tremendous restraint and imagination that the town has used in keeping its staffing at the level at which it is, and yet producing more services. The only caution I would like to make to both boards is that I happen to be looking at education, but I'll say the same for the town. When we list the investments deferred, we always list capital bonding. And so we're pleading as a Board of Finance for restraint next year when you put your capital bonding proposals before us. But I think everyone should be congratulated on these budgets, and I certainly support it.
Sure, I'll go. I'd just like to commend the Board of Selectmen, the town department heads, Dr. Freeman and his staff, and the Board of Education for coming in with the budgets that they presented. Looking back a few years after the referendum to build the new high school was adopted, this was a year that everybody was kind of looking at with a certain amount of dread and fear, because this is the year that we were going to have the first wave of substantial increases in the debt service to cover the cost of the high school construction. And fortunately, the Board of Education and the town Board of Selectmen have managed their departments in a way that they were prepared for not only the increase in the debt service that was coming, but they also, on the town side, took advantage of the economic climate to reduce the amount of debt, lower so the town will realize a substantial savings in the cost of the new high school. And in anticipation of this year in particular, when the first substantial debt service is going to need to be made, the town department heads and the Board of Education and Dr. Freeman and his staff were particularly mindful that this was not the year to make substantial requests for any sort of non-salary related increases in the budget. And I think they and their staffs and the teachers and the employees of the town need to be commended for recognizing that and looking to be as efficient as they can with the resources that they currently have. Outside of the negotiated salary increases, there's really not a lot of new programs or expenditures within either of these budgets, and that's a reflection on the awareness of the boards of education and the Board of Selectmen of the phase of the town's economic history that we're heading into this year, and I think they should be commended for it, and I'm looking forward to voting in favor of the budget.
Others?
Ken? A couple of things. I think you all know where I stand on the budget. And I'm actually going to vote for the budget. I fully intended to vote for it all along. I'm relatively new. I am new to this board, new to this process. I do think there are ways going forward that we can reduce our costs. I think it's not unreasonable to try to achieve a level or have a goal in terms of where we want to get to and at a point where we feel that we are capped out on our spending. I would have liked to have seen math I was disappointed that math didn't get put into this year's budget. I think it's an important thing. I like the idea of art. I recognize that putting in those programs implies higher costs and or reductions in something else. But I actually thought that you would push harder to get both math and art into the budget. I am very concerned, as Mr. Gammerman mentions, about capital requests coming in the next year. I know there's some coming next year from both sides, from the town and from the Board of Ed, and we're going to see it again 2 years after that. I can only hope, as I told you, the per capita income in Guilford has gone down. The median household income has gone down. So I can only hope that when we are going through our contract negotiations, we keep that in mind. I believe the Board of Ed has a bus contract coming up. I'm sure they will work diligently to keep it as low as we possibly can. I know that there's studies being done with regard to start times at the school, which will ultimately give the board significantly more information on how our bus runs currently run and operate and who's using the bus. And I'm sure that they will make the right decisions and perform the analyses necessary to come up with a cost-effective strategy. So having said all that, I know I sound critical, and I tend to be sort of critical, but I do think everybody's working very hard, and I do think, there's always a way to do things slightly better, and hopefully we'll all work together and get there. And so next year, I might not be as easy in terms of saying yes to the budget, but this year I'm going to say yes.
We'll take it one at a time, which is unfortunately the only way we can do municipal budgeting, quite honestly. Anybody else, or?
I'll jump in, Matt. I mean, I obviously had quite a bit to say already, and so I'll try not to necessarily reproduce that, but I agree with Mr. McKenzie that it is absolutely essential, and I think I said that, and I appreciate every person who comes to this board and people who come to our meetings and people who write in the newspapers. Every observation and comment on the budgets, it's the town's government, and our job is to hear that and process it, and then at the end of the day, scour the reports and look for irresponsible, unnecessary, or simply wrong information, calculations, or propositions. And to the extent that I think we saw any of those, we've had a chance to this point to comment on it, and there have been significant reductions in the budgets since they were originally proposed, and as they stand, I wholly support them and intend to vote yes. In fact, and again, the problem with going fifth is sometimes people have already had a chance to say some things, but you could make the argument that the opposite of an extremely stringent budget is called for. I mean, it would be nice to have more sidewalks. I think many people would agree as we come through, well, as it turns out, this winter, not particularly bad, but last winter, the impact on the roads is enormous, and there's always pressure on capital. And again, Town Hall does a wonderful job, and our Public Works Department does an amazing job of keeping things functioning and improving, in fact, but there's always more to do. So you could seriously make the argument to spend more. Arts and music proposed for the school, would that have been wonderful? It's hard to find somebody who would say, no, that's not a good idea, but there's priorities that have to be made. And I think hard decisions were made, and I respect that, and I appreciate the focus on the bottom line by the Board of Ed. The school busing, there was a lot of momentum and a lot of pressure to get that done. It was an expense that this year, it's not that it wasn't considered important, but it was prioritized in such a way that maybe it'll get addressed in a future year, and I hope it does. I'm particularly impressed with the risk, and it is a big risk, to have moved the autism program in-house as it has been done. That meant hiring a number of staff and moving a considerable expense in-house for expenses that you could just say, well, there's a bill, we're going to pay it, and it's out of our control, which had been the case for many years, and many of us cringed at those numbers. And so a high-risk event took place, and the Board of Ed and the administration took the opportunity to move those programs in-house. Those are just a few of the things that have been done to keep the budgets not only, in my opinion, acceptable, but moving in an increasingly positive direction. And I guess I would just finish off with, not just in capital, but in other programs, you can get to a point where underspending in the short term can end up being more expensive in the long term, particularly with education, if you think about it. I mean, that's lifelong opportunity for our citizens, and it's just important. So I support this budget as proposed.
Mike?
I did the count. I've done this 10 years in a row, and I think the majority of the time I've gone last. So I've always...
I'll relieve you of that burden. I'll go after you.
I've gotten used to try to say something that everyone else hasn't said, which is pretty impossible with this one. I will reiterate, though, that 4 months ago when we started looking at these budgets, it was It was crazy what we were looking at. I didn't think we were going to get to where we are today. I'm not going to say much actually about the Board of Ed. They did an incredible job getting to where they are with the 1.99. But I did look at a few things on the town side, and this is more commentary, I think, for the public than it is anybody in this room, because we all know it. But when you look at the increases on the town side, and we've kind of batted this about, or talked about it a little bit, but the salaries and the employee benefits are 2/3 of the increase. So we know that the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen have to deal with salaries and employee benefits as a major component, right? The operating was very, very small in an increase of 1.22%, but the capital was 13%, or almost 14%. And it was noted very clearly in the presentation that a $140,000 increase in the capital was, there were a lot of decreases. That's what a lot of the public isn't going to see. There were decreases in that, and the increases were where they were really needed. The various infrastructure improvements, road improvements, aging equipments, a couple of vehicles, not to the level that we've seen in the past, drainage issues with the roads. But the one thing I noted was the police department. $200,000 for computer technology that they have needed for a while is in this budget. You take that $200,000 out, the capital would have gone down, and it would have been even less. And that is something that has been sorely needed, and it's a public safety issue, so it should be in there. Another point was, and I'm glad that Peter brought this up, was about the fund balance, unassigned fund balance. But I'll take it one step further. You're absolutely right in everything you said, but it was lower than 3.131 million in 2010-11. It was 2.424 million the year before that. That was our low. Every year since then, we have averaged about 23% in an increase in that. And I want to make sure I reiterate that this is not, one of the things that the first selectman said is, this is not a budget that we plan on a surplus. This is due to some very, very good conservative budgeting, zero-based budgeting, and management of the departments. What that allowed us was mentioned was the AAA rating, which helped us to save immensely on the bonding of the high school to the tune of $23 million. What we were looking at in 2011 to 2016, $23 million in savings, I will take that. The last thing is if the high school wasn't included. We made a vote as a community in 2011 by a vote of 3-1 to move forward with the high school, and now it's hitting 5 years later. And I know that the town and I know the Board of Ed had this in their minds when they were considering this budget this year. But just looking at the high school alone, you're looking at a 1.33% increase in the in expenditures. And if we just added bonding at a regular level, so there's no high school, we just flattened out the bonding, it's just a smidge over 2.02. But the mill rate that's anticipated, if it wasn't for the high school, the mill rate would go down this year. And it was a commitment that we made as a community that we cannot forget 5 years ago. And if you still think that it was a mistake, go to the high school today. And that's really all I have to say. I'm definitely going to be in favor of this budget after all the work that was done by the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, Mike. I will also, I tipped my hand, I think, at the beginning of the meeting, and then by putting the motion out, which way I was going to vote. And I'm doing so because I think these budgets are responsible budgets. They reflect a genuine concern for the taxpayers, weighed against the same expectations that those taxpayers put on us for goods and for services that they expect to get. A 1.99% increase on the Board of Education is, unheard of, Peter, as you said. That kind of trend line looks pretty good. I'm not sure we're going to see it continue that way. And the Board of Selectmen bringing in a 2.5% increase with, a bulk of that coming on their salaries and benefit stuff. It's just, there's no escaping where the pressures are. I also want everybody just to think about something, take a look at each other and the focus in this audience. Our job is significantly harder than our counterparts in Hartford and our counterparts at the federal level. We don't have the luxury of issuing treasury bonds. We don't have the luxury of overstating tax revenues. We don't have the luxury of putting together budgets that we know aren't balanced. The local level is the only level of government where that is a requirement. So could we make other decisions? Could, and say, certainly, we expect tax increase, tax revenues to come in significantly higher. We could do that game. We could play that game. We don't have that luxury. So, who was it? The buck stops here at the local level. This is where it is. And we have to produce responsible budgets that are balanced. So, with that, I will call the motion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Public forum. Anyone wishing to address the board in public forum? Hearing none before we adjourn, I do want to echo the sentiments of the fellow board members who have suggested that this is a well-crafted and a tedious process. People have worked hard. I want to congratulate the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Education, and the respective staffs, the finance office, department heads on both sides of the ledger. So thank you very much for all the work you do. Thank you. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye.